JD's and Lettleman, welcome back to the show. 110 SAS Actual here, and we have something super interesting today. One might even call it neat. Guys, Shell Shock Technologies, an ammunition that is 30% lighter, it's faster, it is stronger, and it is the same price as your brass 5.56. What are the advantages, and why is the military looking to pick this up? Guys, let's talk about it. Guys, we are talking about Shell Shock Technologies from Badlands Munitions. What is so important about having a stronger, a lighter, and a faster cartridge than any other 5.56 produced? Well, we have to start at the beginning. Time and time again, the US military has constantly tried to redevelop the M4. We've gone from this M16A1 to 11.5s to 10.3s to 14.5s to a 16-inch to an 18-inch. It's just on and on and on. But what we have seen a lot since the global war on terror is a constant advancement in a perpetual cycle of trying to improve the M4. Let's talk about the SCAR project, for instance. We've seen the HK416, we've seen the SCAR L, we've seen all of the other entries, including the super rare Knights armament entries into that SCAR program. And ultimately, there were some entries did improve upon the basic M4. Ultimately, it was decided that, hey, the juice ain't worth the squeeze. Uncle Sam's just gonna hold on to his taxpayer money just a little bit longer. So instead of picking an improved 5.56 rifle, they started doing testing on bringing back 7.62. You guys know the M14, all of its greatness, all of its cons that come with it as well. We did decide that, hey, the M14 ain't it. But what if we did an AR-10 platform? That brought upon new projects like the M110K1, the SCAR, and multiple different entries. Well, come to find out that these things, they're just too heavy. An average M4 is gonna be right around 8 pounds to 9 pounds kitted out. Your average M110K1, guys, those things are going to be over 10 pounds, probably pushing close, fully loaded, to 12 to 13 pounds. Yes, the answer is to hit the gym, but they decided that, hey, these just way too much. We can't carry nearly as much ammo. My average loadout has gone down from 360 rounds all the way down to like 180. I would rather have a cartridge that I can shoot 360 times before I'm Winchester on ammo than 180 times. Not to mention the extra recoil of the 7.62 cartridge. Simply put, you can't put as fast and accurate rounds on target with the average shooter with a 7.62 gun as you can a 5.56. Again, another program scrapped. The juice just ain't worth the squeeze, homie. So, back to the 5.56. Now, let's say old Bob here is the finest general that we have in all of the military. He decided one day, let's make 7.62 great again. But they didn't. They made SIG 277 Fury. And it's an absolute flop. And nobody likes it. And it's not working. It's heavy, it's malfunctioning, and ammo issues out the wazoo. So, what does the military do? Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's improve upon 5.56. This is where Shell Shock Technologies comes into play. And guys, we are going to show you what it's all about. So it seems all along that the military has been asking all of the right questions, but getting all of the wrong answers. They want something new from the ground up, but they have never asked the real question. How can we improve upon the exact same package that we already have with a new nickel alloy stainless case? So what makes this stuff so much better than brass? Let's talk about pressure. Pressure being the number one point here. The best way to describe this is this new nickel alloy case in a completely new design over a brass case. Now, why is that important? Why does it matter what metal it's made out of? Pressure. This case can withstand a tremendous amount more pressure than your typical 5.56. So let's say, for instance, we start seeing right around 65,000 to 70,000 PSI. Brass, it starts to pop primers. The cases start to rupture, getting stuck in the chamber. Because that case can't withstand that pressure, we now have damage to the gun. But there's something even better. A case that can withstand over 100,000 PSI. And because it can handle more pressure, we can get this thing going much faster without damaging our firearm and causing catastrophic malfunctions and breakages. So today we are going to test this new cartridge that's offered by Badlands Munitions. We have gathered the most popular barrel lengths on the market, period. We have a 10.3 inch rifle, an 11.5, a 14.5, a 16 inch, an 18 inch, and of course, a 20 inch for the vibes, baby. M16A1 can never be beat. Each of these rifles are going to be put on a Garmin chronograph. We've got the stainless steel cases versus the brass. We've got 77 grain in brass. We've got 77 grain in stainless steel. We've got 85 grain in stainless steel. We've got 55 grain in stainless steel, and we've got 55 grain in brass. We are going to show you guys the absolute capabilities of this new cartridge and the pressures it can stand without spiking pressure. Because of this new cartridge, we have thinner walls. We have more case volume, and because there's more case volume, we get more powder fill. And with the more powder fill of a bigger case, we remain pressures under 62,000 PSI, which is right at that sweet point of the M4 platform. We're gonna start with 55 grain. I feel like a lot of people just shoot 55 grain, especially for training and some plinking ammunition. We have PMC X-Tac M193, which is their 5.56 counterpart. We found that's a lot more spicy than their PMC bronze stuff. So that's the ammunition we're gonna run for our brass 5.56. First rifle up is this Adcore. It's a 10.3-inch 5.56 gun. So let's go ahead and start shooting. Okay, so we're gonna do 5 rounds for each cartridge. And 26.98. Okay guys, with the 10.3-inch 5.56 PMC X-Tac, we have an average velocity of 27.11. We have the Shell Shock next. So this is Badlands 55 grain stuff loaded into the Shell Shock cases. Check this stuff out. Okay, let's fire a few rounds of this. And 3,031.5. Guys, we're talking almost 300 feet per second faster. Wow, and lower SDs than the PMC as well. Okay, so we have the 55 grain. As we can see here, guys, it's so much faster. 300 feet per second faster. That's absolutely insane. We're gonna talk about the ballistics of this and why this is important to get 300 feet per second faster in your duty rifle. But before we do that, let's move on to 77 grain. Guys, 77 grain is pretty much the gold standard of weight when it comes to a 5.56 projectile. So we need to test that. Now for testing, we have Black Hills 77 grain. This is military contract government ammo. And then we also have Badlands own brass case 77 grain. And then we have Federal Gold Medal Match 77 grain. And then Badlands Shell Shock 77 grain. Let's put them on paper. Okay, so now we're doing the 77 grain here, boys. First, we're gonna start with Black Hills. This is exactly what SF hitters been using since, well, it's global war on terror. Let's get this going here. Let's see what we got. This is a 10.3-inch barrel, boys. And 22.83. So roughly 2,300 feet per second out of the Black Hills 77 grain. Next, we have Federal Gold Medal Match, guys. These are all 77 grain Sierra Match King bullets. We got a malfunction, actually. Okay, and 24.35. So, Federal Gold Medal Match 77 grain ammunition here. We have an average of 24.07. Let's go ahead and move over to the Badlands Munitions. I think my gun just needs cleaned or something. 24.38. And 24.28. So, we have an average of 24.42 with the Badlands Munitions. Finally, we have Shell Shock Badlands Munitions 77 grain. We've been averaging roughly 2,400 feet per second out of this 10.3 with a 77. Let's see what it does with Shell Shock. $24.92. $24.93. $24.90 and $24.22. So we have an average, guys, with the Badlands of 24.83. So we have significantly faster ammunition out of a 10.3-inch carbine. But where we start to see a lot of that huge advantage is out of a little bit longer barrel. So let's move on up to an 11.5-inch. Okay, guys, we have a Knights Armament SR15. This is an 11.5-inch carbine. It actually has a really new barrel in it. I just rebarreled it a couple months back, so this should get us good, accurate results. Starting with PMC X-Tac M193 5.56 55 grain. and 26.55. Guys, PMC X-Tac gives us a muzzle average of 26.70. Let's move on to the stainless steel. Now we have the Shell Shock 55 grain out of the Knight's Armament SR15 11.5 inch. Let's see what it's all about, boys. 3,027 and 3,051. Guys, that gives us a muzzle average of 3,019, just under 30/20 muzzle velocity. That is absolutely incredible. First up for the 77 grains out of the 11.5 inch is Black Hills. Let's go. 22.59 and 23.48. So Black Hills 77 grain is giving us a muzzle average of 23.12 with the 77 Sierra Match Kings. Next we have the Federal Gold Medal Match 77 grain Sierra Match King. And 24.13. So Federal Gold Medal Match is giving us a muzzle velocity average of 23.90.7. Next for the brass cases, the final of the 77s is the Badlands. Let's do a few shots, boys. 23.97. So with the Badlands 77 brass case, we have 2020.9 with standard deviation of 13.3. Okay, Shell Shock 77 out of the 11.5 inch. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of feels like a sin just to mag dump all of this match ammo into the trash, but I love you guys. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'll mag dump into trash for you guys every day. Shell Shock 25.25. 25.37. So with the Shell Shock from Badlands, we have a standard deviation of 10, which is outstanding, and an average muzzle velocity of 2,541. So much faster than the 77 grains. And I'm gonna tell you guys why this is so important. Let's move on to the next barrel length. All right, JDs and gentlemen, the next entry is a 14.5 inch. This is just your most basic M4 ever. We have a Colt SOCOM barrel. It's all Colt. This is pretty much exactly what our modern military is using right now. So we're gonna start with 55 grain PMC and 29.33. So guys, with the 14.5 inch Colt, we have a muzzle average of 29.61. Let's move over to Shell Shock. Okay, and now we have the Badlands Shell Shock 55 grain. Let's see what this does. 3,279. 3,348. So with the Badlands Munitions, again, we are getting over 200 feet per second more in muzzle velocity with an average of 33.17. Starting first, we have Black Hills 77 grain and 25.54. So with the 14.5 inch Colt M4, we have a muzzle average of 25.41 with 77 grain from Black Hills. All right, Federal Gold Medal Match and 26.05. So we have a muzzle average of 2,600, Federal Gold Medal Match. Let's move to the Badlands Brass 77 grain. Badlands Brass 77 grain Sierra Match King. 26.57. Come check this out. This is actually pretty crazy results. So we have a standard deviation of 2.2 with the Badlands 77 grain with a muzzle average of 26.55.5. And finally, Shell Shock Badlands 77 Sierra Match King and 27.73. So that gives us a muzzle average of 27.42. Again, significantly faster than anything in the brass case. But we still have work to do, boys. Let's move over to the 16 inch. We're gonna start with the 55 grain X-Tac from PMC. And 3,047. So with the 16 inch gun, guys, we have a muzzle velocity average of 3,022 with PMC X-Tac. Shell Shock out of the 16 inch. 3,400. So we have an average muzzle velocity with this 16 inch gun of 33.65. 77 grain Sierra Match King from Black Hills out of the 16 inch. And finally, 25.51. So the Black Hills is giving us a muzzle average of 25.59. Federal Gold Medal Match 77 grain. Finally, 2656, a muzzle average of 2646. Last for the brass cases, this is Badlands 77 grain Sierra Match King. And 2679. So Badlands is giving us a muzzle average of 2684 out of the 16-inch 77 grain shell shock. And 2759. So we have a muzzle velocity average of just under 100 feet per second from the fastest 77 grain. Not too bad. That's not too shabby. That's giving us extra yards of predictability and hits. So next we have one of my favorite rifles. This is the Mark 12 SPR. This is a Global War on Terror icon kind of rifle. This was made to bridge that gap between a heavy hitting 7.62 gun and your typical 14.5 M4 carbine. This is basically an accurized M16. So we're going to start with 55 grain. We're going to start X-Tac M193. Let's see what we got, boys. And finally, 3,123. That gives us a muzzle average of 31.25. Now we got shell shock. And 3,510. Guys, that gives us a muzzle average of just under 3,500 feet per second out of your Mark 12. That's insane. 300 feet per second faster. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the 77 grain brass cases. This is Black Hills. And 2638. That gives us a muzzle average of 2642 with Black Hills 77. Federal Gold Medal Match 77. And finally, 2701. Guys, that gives us a muzzle average with Federal Gold Medal Match out of the Mark 12. 2706. And last for the brass cases out of the 77 grain is Badlands' own ammunition. Let's check this out. 2794 and 2786. So this Mark 12 absolutely loves Badlands Munitions 77 grain. We have a standard deviation of 7.8 and a muzzle velocity average of 2784. So let's take a look at this shell shock 77s out of this Mark 12. And 2850. So we have an average of 2867.5. This is absolutely fantastic results because this is getting us more range. This is getting us significantly more predictability of hits on target. We're going to punch all of this information into a ballistic calculator here and show you guys why this is so important. But before we do that, I want to introduce one more cartridge. It's Badlands 85 grain. They make a super heavy match grade bullet. It is a Barnes 85 grain bullet. It is absolutely phenomenal. We have longer distances with it and more energy. So let's run it through here and see. And we're going to compare it direct to Barnes factory load. Barnes OEM 85 grains. And finally, 2645. I will say them SDs are phenomenal. 5.7 with a muzzle average of 2640 with an 85 grain pill. Let's go ahead and move over to the Shell Shock 85. 2713. So we have an average muzzle velocity of 2725. That's 80 feet per second faster than the brass stuff in an 85 grain bullet. All right, so now we've got all of this data. What are we gonna do with it? Let's head back to the shop and let's start talking some numbers with the ballistic calculator. So why is this so important to get so much more muzzle velocity without changing the pressures in your firearm? This is why it's so important. That extra muzzle velocity is taking your 5.56 gun and making it so much more capable. First, let's talk about the muzzle velocities through each barrel length. So first, let's talk about the 55 grain stuff, the brass versus the Badlands shell shock ammunition. Shell shock is going 3,034 feet per second out of a 10.3 inch gun and a 55 grain pill. It's going 2711 with PMC X-Tac M193. That is substantial. That's over 300 feet per second increase. 300 feet per second. That is substantial. That's more barrier penetration. That's more yards downrange in which the 5.56 is going to impact and tumble on soft tissue. It makes your carbine a much more lethal weapon. Let's move up to the 11.5 inch. At the 11.5 inch, we got 2670 with brass and 3051 with the shell shock. Next, let's talk about the 14.5 inch. So this is our standard issue M4A1. That's exactly like you used in the test. It is exactly what is being used by our military today. So with the brass, we have 2961. Pretty substantial. That's solid. That's going pretty good for a 55 grain pill. But what's it doing with the shell shock? The shell shock is doing 3,317 feet per second. Guys, we have almost 300 feet per second difference. Again, that is just absolutely outstanding. It's making your carbine so much more lethal in increasing your effective max range. You are an asset to your team with a firearm that can shoot further and make hits on impact that are predictable hits on impact. Next, I want to talk about the 18 inch. So this is your Mark 12 SPR kind of gun. This is a very, very popular accurized 5.56 gun. Lots of match shooters shoot an 18 inch 5.56 gun. It's the best blend of not being a complete musket, but also getting good muzzle velocity. This is where it gets pretty crazy. So on the 18 inch, we have 3,125 feet per second with the brass stuff. With Badlands, guys, we are going 3,500 feet per second. 3,500 feet per second out of an 18 inch gun with the 55 grain bullet. That's absolutely crazy. That is so fast. I mean, to be quite frank with you, to get those kinds of speeds, you kind of have to run like a 26 inch gun. And even then, I don't even think 5.56 does very well. Beyond 20 inches, actually 18 inches is kind of that sweet spot. So in order to get that, you're going to have to overpressure a brass cartridge. And that case is just not going to be able to hold that extra pressure because, again, it is not like the shell shock. It doesn't have the thinner case walls and it's not made of the stronger material, which means the more case volume means we have capability of keeping pressures down. So we have a more effective carbine with the 55 grain, but what about the 77 grain? Again, far more lethal platform with just a cartridge change. The most important thing here, guys, is when you're shooting like a match grade bullet, like a 77 grain Sierra Match King, the difference is outstanding. Why? Because we are getting easily another 100 yards before that bullet is going subsonic. And during that transonic state, they can start to tumble and the bullet becomes unpredictable. If you can call the wind perfectly, you can essentially predict exactly where your bullet is going to land if you know your dope and you can call the wind. But when you start to go into that transonic state, unfortunately, the bullet starts to do weird things because the turbulence around the projectile isn't the same as it was supersonic. So it can start to knuckle, it can start to tumble and do all sorts of weird things that again make your point of impact essentially a guess. Your best guess versus knowing exactly where that bullet is going to go if you've done your job in calling the wind and knowing your dope. So this is where it gets fun, guys. So with the 77 grain Black Hills, that stuff is very slow. On average, it's like 100 feet per second slower than any of the other competitors. The Badlands stuff is the fastest out of the brass. That's running roughly 2750. Federal Gold Medal Match is running roughly 2700, and the Black Hill stuff is going roughly 2600. That's with brass 77 grain. That's pretty slow, 2600. I don't like that out of the Black Hills. The Federal Gold Medal Match going 2700. That's pretty standard. That's pretty much what you push an 18 inch barrel using a 77 grain bullet. That's just kind of what it does. Anything else past that is just extra. So Badlands hitting right there at the 2750. That's solid. Very well done. But the shell shock is what makes it most important. We're getting an average of 2,900 feet per second with a 77 grain projectile. That's fantastic. That is 150 feet per second faster. Take a look at these ballistic charts here. So we have the 77 grain brass stuff, Federal Gold Medal Match, and the 77 grain shell shock stuff. Look at the difference. So at 750 yards, as you can see here, that's when we start to go transonic with the Mark 12 using the brass ammo. It means, again, that bullet in the air is going subsonic and it is starting to tumble, potentially knuckle and causing a unpredictable point of impact. The 77 grain shell shock stuff, look what we see here. It's getting an extra 100 yards of predictability. So that means, literally that you've added 100 yards to your gun. You've added at least 4 inches to your barrel length without adding 4 inches to your barrel length. It's the same thing with the 10.3 inch stuff. You are adding essentially 3.5 inches to your barrel without actually adding 3 inches to your barrel. That is something the military has been trying to do for years and years and years, but have never been able to until technology has allowed it. So this is huge, and this is huge for the military. I think realistically, this could potentially be the legitimate future of 5.56, because we've tried so many times to reinvent the wheel when it comes to the 5.56 gun, completely replacing it, changing entire cartridges, and we've never really looked within, like, okay, how can we make this gun more of a hot rod versus starting from scratch? And I believe this ammunition is the answer. And this is the reason why the military is testing this stuff right now. And it is going to be huge. Just look at Geisley. So they have their 7mm backcountry gun. It's pumping up some serious pressures, and the guns are holding up. So that stuff, I would say roughly 70 to 80,000 PSI probably. The guns are holding up. They're not blowing up on their customers. So something's up. And this is super exciting to see. So we are taking 14.5 inch guns and turning them into 16 inch guns. We're taking 10.3 inch guns, turning them into 14.5s. We're turning 18 inch guns into 22 and 24 inch firearms. This is substantial. So one cool thing is I got with these guys before I made this video. I said, hey, this is some super cool stuff. They have given us a discount code. So if you guys want to try this stuff in your own guns, guys, use code 110SAS. You're going to get 10% off your entire purchase. Any ammo, whether you do brass or whether you do their shell shock stuff. They actually manufactured some shell shock stuff just for this video to make sure that you guys get some for the people that do want it. So again, if you guys want to try this stuff, if you want to go big, get a bunch of it, if you just want to try it, that's cool too. You get 10% off if you use code 110SAS. So guys, go check them out. I'm telling you, this ammo, it's a no-brainer. It genuinely is. It's the same exact price as most manufacturers are selling their high-end match stuff for, but you are getting more yards out of your gun and making your carbine and your rifle that much more lethal. So until next time, guys, say it with me, run your gun, not your mouth. We'll catch you next time.